Paul, thanks very much for agreeing to speak to me today. You've just celebrated your 30 years in Hiscox. Congratulations. If we could start by discussing, how did you get into insurance? Did you fall into it like a lot of other people or not?
No, for me it was an active choice. So my father had worked in insurance for a long time. He left school and got a job working at the QBE, as it is now, and I'd always been fascinated by his stories of underwriters, and I'd wanted to be in insurance, I think all the way through, certainly my formative years at school. So I had no interest in going to university. I wanted to make money. I wanted to earn my way through the world. And so as soon as I got towards the end of my A-levels, I asked him where I should apply, and he gave me a list of people to write to, and I wrote to all of those people. I eventually got an interview with a company called E.W. Payne, which is now part of Marsh, but at the time was a separate trading entity. And I left school on Friday and started work on Monday, and that was that, straight in.
Yeah, never looked back.
Never looked back.
What was your first job with Hiscox?
So believe it or not, with my classical background, I was a fine art underwriter. So I joined the fine art team. I think it took me about 6 months to realise that fine art probably wasn't going to be the class of business that led me to greatness. But Hiscox was a big syndicate at the time and had lots of opportunity. So I moved into a different line of business, which was our high-value household product, which we became famous for over time. And I started working there. My view was I knew more about houses than I did about art.
How different was it working at Lloyds back then than it is now? I mean, could you give me what your sort of average day was as an underwriter then, and how that differs to junior underwriters now?
Yeah, I think the big difference is that when I started in Lloyds, you didn't come to an office. My first job in Lloyds, I was called a scratch boy, because your job was to deal with the underwriters they'd scratched the slip, and then I would do what they did after that. So typical day for me would have been, first thing straight to the box. In those days, the waiters dropped off a set of punch cards every morning, and those cards would be the risk you'd written the previous week, so a week behind that day. And those punch cards would be a different colour for a different currency. So clearly no euros back then, but there were Canadian dollars, US dollars, sterling. So you'd have a batch of cards, and then I would prepare that for the underwriter when he came down. We'd do our sort of operational or ops work would be done at that box. We had computer screens, but not really computers. They were effectively a database input. All of the actual records were in books, and so I'd have to, when a broker came in, I would look up the risk, get the book out, open it up to the card, get the card out, and that card would be our history on that risk going back over time. And if each card would hold 5 years of history, sometimes there'd be 3 or 4 cards stapled together, and that would represent the whole history of our syndicate and that risk. Today's young underwriters, frankly, Lloyds, the concept of on-the-spot trading in Lloyds is unfortunately in the past. I mean, rarely now would a broker turn up with a slip and leave with a stamp. The amount of regulatory oversight, pricing oversight, the information needed now to take on a risk, the amount of data we store in our systems, almost make that impractical to do, in the moment. So I think it's a great shame, because I think that skill, I suppose, of being able to assess a risk in less than 5 minutes and decide how much money you're going to stake on that risk for what premium, I think is a dying, something that's now outdated, unfortunately.
Do you feel a bit nostalgic for that? Do you think
I do.
that the market could do with Or do you think that's just...
I think I do
ship
feel
sailed?
nostalgic about it, but I don't know that we could ever go back there. I think the room provides a uniqueness that the London market has that is replicated nowhere else in the world. And I think if we're not careful, if we lose that, I wonder what makes London different to Amsterdam or Paris or New York. And I think that would be a real shame. And I think the excitement that you can get from being in the room when it's buzzing and it's a busy renewal season or post some form of event or catastrophe, when the room was busy and you could almost feel the excitement in the market, that still excites me now just thinking about it.
Yeah. Since you took over as Chief Underwriting Officer of London Market, you must have seen some enormous changes.
I think the biggest change in, I suppose, our business has been that change in regulation from being a very self-regulated market. When I joined Lloyds, the only regulator was Lloyds, and so we were self-regulated. The regulation was relatively light. That meant that we almost as a market decided how we would run the market. When that changed, the FSA then split into the two that we have now. So the first instalment was FSA. That sort of introduced more rigorous oversight, which meant business planning became an actual thing rather than we just tell Lloyds what we're going to do. It actually becomes more of a two-way conversation. I think we then have outside interest in what we're doing, not just Lloyds. But that coincided with changes in Hiscox as a group. We created an insurance company. We grew into Europe. We have over time grown into the US. We opened an office in Bermuda. So each one of those steps brings with it, new challenges, new oversight. Every single one of those countries has their own sets of regulators. So I think the role has changed somewhat. The irony is the active underwriter is an inactive underwriter.
Sure.
I don't actually take any individual risks anymore. My role is to, in effect, oversee all of the underwriters and all the underwriting we do. You look at someone like Michael Miko, he is an active underwriter that actively underwrites, but it's a relatively small syndicate and probably unique. Whereas we have 18 different lines of business within London Market. We split that into 4 divisions. So I have 4 direct reports from an underwriting perspective. Then there's 60 underwriters, 18 line underwriters, and then a variety of deputies and assistant underwriters. So over the last few years, that role has changed quite dramatically as we've got bigger. The role becomes more about how much of this do we do versus that, and what's the reinsurance cost. There's capital. When I joined Lloyds, no one talked about capital. No one talks about return on equity. Those are now the sort of key drivers of performance.